Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Disrupt Film series. My name is Veronica Medina. I am a trustee with the Museum of Political Corruption and the director of the Disrupt program. Today, December 9, we celebrate International Anti-Corruption Day. And so tonight, just like we've been doing the last couple of years, we are pleased to announce the 2024 inductees to the museum's Hall of Shame and Hall of Honor. Let's take a quick minute to watch the video with MPC's founder and president, Bruce Roeder.
Thanks, Veronica. And thank you for the amazing work you've done in producing our Disrupt film series. And good evening, all. It is December 9th, International Anti-Corruption Day. And as we've done in years past, we have selected this day to announce this year's inductees into our Hall of Honor and Hall of Shame. We hope that the actions against corruption taken by those in our Hall of Honor will serve as a source of inspiration. And we also hope that the corrupt actions by those taken in our Hall of Shame can serve current and future leaders as cautionary tales. And now, for this year's inductees into our Hall of Shame. They include former California Congressman Randy Duke Cunningham, former Senator from Illinois William Lorimer, Thomas Manton, who served as a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, Tammany Hall boss Richard Crocker, and Tom Pendergast, a political boss in Kansas City during the 1920s and 1930s. The 5 inductees into the Hall of Honor include the late Russian anti-corruption activist Alexei Navalny, famed Washington Post reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, Nobel Peace Prize laureate Maria Ressa, and pioneering social reformer Jane Addams. We congratulate all of those inducted into our Hall of Honor. Additionally, the museum will honor this year's winner of its Nellie Bly Award for Investigative Reporting, ProPublica's Supreme Court investigation team, with a place in the Hall of Honor among previous Nellie Bly Award winners. More information about this year's inductees can be found by visiting our Hall of Shame and Hall of Honor at our online museum at www.museumofpoliticalcorruption.org. Thank you, and Veronica, back to you.
Thank you, Bruce. I want to thank you all so much for being here with us tonight on our very last film discussion of 2024. And what a year this has been. We had historic elections happening all over the world with more than 4 billion people in over 70 countries heading to the polls, truly reflecting a significant moment for democratic systems worldwide. In the US, we had a historic election of our own with, a sitting president dropping out of his re-election race to an unprecedented victory by a former president in an unprecedented election cycle. But we have also seen the rise in political turmoil across the globe with the persecution of political dissidents and growing geopolitical tensions in region with ongoing conflicts, events with consequential shifts in the power dynamics among the world's most powerful nations. So in a world where political landscapes are continuously evolving, understanding the core concepts of democracy become increasingly pertinent. And that's exactly what we've been trying to accomplish with Disrupt. This year, our film series has taken us on a thought-provoking journey, asking difficult questions and exploring the complexities and challenges of modern democracy. Through powerful films and discussions, we have addressed the issue of polarization, a growing concern in many democratic nations. We talked about the disparity between democratic ideals and the realities experienced by citizens in their everyday lives. We discussed the role of money in politics and how the power-wealth dynamics have been influencing and shaping public policy, and the urgent need for more transparency and accountability in governance and in the democratic process. Tonight, as we present the last film discussion of the year, we want to focus on the path forward. Where do we go from here? And what can we, citizens, do to safeguard democracy? It was driven by these questions that we chose to spotlight PBS's documentary, A Citizen's Guide to Preserving Democracy. The film is based on the book by American diplomat Richard Haass, The Bill of Obligations, The 10 Habits of Good Citizens, which highlights good citizenship practices that can help expand our understanding of democracy, as well as our individual and collective responsibilities to preserve it. Let's take a quick look back at the film.
Spectator sport. Democracy requires people to suit up and get on the field.
It doesn't matter whether or not you're Republican, Democratic, Independent, whether you're in the Green Party, it doesn't really matter as long as you're here for America to be better.
And we resonate to the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who and I'll paraphrase, who said, we hate each other because we fear each other, and we fear each other because we don't understand each other, and we don't understand each other because we don't talk to each other. And our goal with this Great Lakes Civility Project is to get people to talk to each other.
And that's what I love about the service I'm involved in Iowa through the American Connection Corps. It's precisely that, it's connection. And when you can connect people together, that connection takes on a life of its own.
We are here for New York City Civics Day. It's kind of like the Super Bowl of civics.
I love the idea of having more people who are younger to be involved in democracy, because this is going to be our future.
This is for the people, right? It's a public place. The common good of being able to reach people, the common good of being able to reintroduce the library to people who potentially may have thought that it wasn't for them.
Hey Renee, welcome in. We had over 300 people come to our events when we were collecting ideas. We collected over 1,300 ideas for how this money should be spent.
Very first time that the city of Evanston is doing it, making sure that all voices were being heard.
I think the stakes are huge. Whether we succeed or not is going to say a lot about the future of democracy and how successful this democracy is going to be for generations.
Just a reminder that this film, as well as its spin-off series, are available for viewing on PBS's website. So without further ado, it's my great honor to introduce the panelists for tonight's roundtable. And I could not be in better company to discuss these provocative yet very inspiring ideas. Joining us tonight is Skye Perryman. She is the president and CEO of Democracy Forward, a nonpartisan organization that promotes democracy and progress through litigation, regulatory engagement, policy education, and research. This year, she was named one of the most influential people shaping policy by the Washingtonian magazine and is at the forefront of the fight of critical issues such as civil rights, reproductive health care, education, and climate change. Also participating is Jonah Minkoff-Zern. He's the co-director of Public Citizens Democracy Campaign and has organized nationwide mobilizations to confront threats to democracy, coordinated grassroots actions for voting rights reform, and advocated for a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. He has also co-founded numerous organizations, including Education Not Incarceration, working to combat the school-to-prison pipeline, and has led numerous state-based initiatives to protect voting rights and election integrity. Thank you both so much for being here with us tonight, and welcome to our program.
Thanks so much, Veronica.
I actually wanted to start just going a little bit deeper on you and both of your, trajectory up to here. Obviously, I introduced you, but I'm sure I left a lot of things out, and I wanted to hear from you a little bit of your trajectory in the advocacy work, how you got here, and also tell us about the work that you guys are doing in your current organizations.
Jonah, do you want to go first?
Sure. I guess I've been an organizer, a lifelong organizer, and as you said, I co-founded a group, Education Not Incarceration, looking at the school to prison pipeline in Oakland. Was there working there in Oakland and nationally for about 8 years, and then went to law school and started at Public Citizen, working on democracy. And our initial work was really just focused on overturning Citizens United and working for a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, the ruling that had just happened, saying that corporations and individuals can spend unlimited amounts to influence elections. And our work progressed to more broad democracy campaigns. And I think maybe fittingly, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it today, I feel like the root of a lot of our problems comes from money in politics and the corruption that leads to, that we're addressing in our nation today. But our work's expanded, looking at from a racial justice lens, working on voting rights and money in politics, and then also responding to the first Trump administration and working to mobilize and preserve democracy as we could through those 4 years, and are preparing to do that again for the next 4 years.
Sky.
Hi, my name is Sky Perryman. I'm a lawyer by training and have spent my career representing clients in a range of matters. Prior to going to law school, I worked at the intersection of labor and environmental issues, and then went to law school. In the wake of the 2016 election, I left my career as a corporate litigation attorney, where I did do a range of public interest work, but also corporate work, in order to full-time dedicate myself to, and my talents and profession to the fight for democracy. I was on the founding litigation team at Democracy Forward, and we worked alongside so many organizations, including Jonah's organization at Public Citizen, to bring a number of cases on behalf of people and communities across the country in order to vindicate their rights against really unlawful and corrupt conduct. I have also served in senior executive roles at women's health organizations. It was the general counsel of the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. And then in 2021, after January 6th, and the clear indication that these threats of extremism that we're facing in the United States to American democracy were not going away, but were intensifying, I came back to Democracy Forward as its president and CEO, where we have been really scaling our work in order to address threats to democracy at both the federal, state, and local levels, as well as opportunities to build a more vibrant and forward-looking future for all people.
That's incredible, and I want to thank you both again for being here. I love how similar the work is, but also from different perspectives. So I'll very much be interested in hearing your answers on the questions. And so one of the things that interests me about advocacy work is that you have to always be prepared for whatever outcome. You need to be ready to respond to really all possible scenarios. So I wanted to hear how was it this year, if it was any different from any previous year, and how did you prepare to face the next day of the election cycle? It was a very intense, it was a very, emotionally driven political campaign this year. So what was the morale like with your teams, and what tips do you give for us trying to navigate these feelings of, loss of loss or hopelessness? So I'd love to hear from you from that. Maybe Sky, you can start.
Sure. Well, I'll say that in the United States, obviously, in 2021, the United States was added to a list of global backsliding democracies following January 6th, and really reports of rampant election denialism and misinformation that went back several years. And it has remained on that list ever since. And part of that is because of the reversals in certain civil and human rights of people, including by the United States Supreme Court, of women's rights in cases such as Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, but also because of state-based extremism and misinformation that we're seeing across the country. And so one thing, as we looked at this year in 2024, we knew it would be a significant one, in many cases, sort of regardless of the outcome of the 2024 federal presidential election, which I will get to in a moment, because really in so many communities throughout the country, democracy, the idea that all individuals, deserve and equal dignity and respect for their rights is really at a tipping point. And in places like Arkansas, for instance, where our team has had to go to court to seek to block laws that would criminally penalize librarians. We have a rise in censorship and book banning across the country, bans on reproductive health care, and a range of situations that are really dire for many people in communities throughout the country. And that is really part of this fight for democracy at the state and local level, and also confronting judicial extremism and the attempt by some organizations to misuse our courts to not protect people's rights, but to actually reverse people's rights. And so this was going to be a significant year in so many ways because of all of these issues that are coming into play. Then on top of that, we really were looking at a presidential election year where several things happened this year. One was that the far-right movement in the United States was quite clear about what it was attempting to do. And it published a document. Many people know it as Project 2025, which is a document that was published by the Heritage Foundation, along with over, I think now 100 endorsing organizations, that proposed a range of quite extreme policies that would, reverse the rights of people, seek to undermine the ability of people to thrive and flourish in the country. And we really saw in public polling and poll after poll that whether people in the United States were conservative or liberal or independent, there was a very low approval rating for that extreme agenda. So we knew that if you're express about the agenda and understand what it is, the vast majority of the American people, when asked, regardless of what their ideological backgrounds are, sort of reject that. We've also seen in the years post Dobbs, which was the case that overturned Roe versus Wade, we've seen public approval for reproductive rights to also transcend various sort of ideological divides, which is something that data has long suggested in the United States, but that many people didn't fully believe. We saw that in this last election, where in places like Missouri, deep red places like Florida, we're seeing the majority of the voting public that was voting vote for the protection of those rights. So we know that the American people, and we knew this throughout the year, do not stand for this sort of type of extremism. And yet at the same time, we saw a political movement in the country that was seeking to wheel and deal in misinformation, a president-elect now, but a candidate at the time that was seeking to distance himself on the campaign trail from a lot of these extreme behaviors and a lot of these extreme proposals, such as in Project 2025. And so, we sort of started preparing for what would happen if the voting public elected an individual who says that President-elect Trump said on the campaign trail he didn't understand Project 2025, didn't know who was behind it. We obviously knew that was not a credible statement, but that is sort of how he campaigned. So what would happen if the American public elected that person, and what would that mean for people in communities across the country that, regardless of their ideological differences or their geographic differences or their backgrounds, do all on many central issues, including issues that in years past might have been seen as polarizing, issues like reproductive rights, actually all by large margins support support an agenda that is, forward leaning with respect to individual rights, and is not in favor of some of the restrictions that we've seen this extreme movement seek to accelerate. And so at Democracy Forward, and alongside many organizations, including Public Citizen, as part of the Democracy 2025 Coalition, which you can see at democracy2025.org, we began preparing for how we could support the American people and communities in this situation where the federal landscape backslid with the election. And that has been a large focus of work that we've been doing, as well as work at that state and local level, which is also very important and incredibly important that people don't lose sight of the work for democracy that needs to happen on behalf of people and communities in their local communities as well. So that's been a lot of how we sort of looked at it. I think for the United States, it's a good testament to the Vice President of the United States' commitment to our Constitution, that you saw her accept election results, concede the election. We didn't have the type of rampant election denialism or misinformation coming out of the candidate that lost the election because it was the vice president. And but now the American people are facing 2025, where just in the last few weeks we've seen a real acceleration of a lot of the extreme plans and behaviors of Project 2025. Some of the architects behind it are already being now appointed to the incoming administration, or at least an intention to appoint them to the incoming administration. And there's going to be a real moment for the American people, because the vast majority of the American people do not stand with sort of these extreme agendas. And yet we have a president-elect that, now that he has been elected, is seeking to accelerate an agenda that he sought to distance himself from. So we're really preparing for that moment, how we can defend people and communities in court, but also what we can do to empower people to use their voices to hold elected leaders to account if they seek to accelerate an extreme agenda that there's no mandate for in the country.
Jonah would like to add?
Yeah, sure. Well, and it's really been an honor to be part of that work with you, Sky, in working to respond and to prepare to respond. And we're really happy to be part of the very impressive structure and ideas that you've been building. So thank you for all your leadership. For me, I've been working, and our team have been working on a mobilization side of things. So we all, like Sky said, we're preparing for some sort of concerning results to the election. So we was very clear, Trump was very clear from the beginning that he would not accept election results if he didn't win the election. And so we were working with a broad pool of organizations, groups like Indivisible and Move On, Working Families Party, and hundreds of organizations to prepare response, both should Harris win and Trump try to interfere with the results of the election or the counting of the election, or Trump allied forces try to commit acts of violence, or a Supreme Court try to overturn a result, or also prepare if Trump won the election. So we were building a grassroots mobilization to prepare for that, and thinking about how we would respond to. Ideally, we were hoping to preserve a result of the election that they were trying to challenge, but in the case that happened, we were ready to respond also. So we were talking earlier, Veronica, the day after election, it was a hard day for all of us, but also we had been preparing. So the 2 days after election, that Thursday evening, we had a call called Making Meaning of the Moment, and we had 100,000 people join that call, which ended up lasting for 4 hours, with leaders across the movement, ranging from people like Congresswoman Jayapal and Congressman Raskin to labor leaders, environmental leaders, immigrant leaders, transgender leaders, people all across the spectrum, to talk about what the implications were of the election and how we can organize and win together and stand in solidarity together. And it was a really beautiful and powerful moment. And from that, we called for gatherings that are taking place still around the country called We Are Worth Fighting For. So we've had more than 600 gatherings around the country where people have gotten together to reflect on the results, build power together, and talk about what our steps forward are. And I think really we have the ability to build something from this, and we have the ability to organize together to win something and to push back against this Project 2025 agenda, this agenda of authoritarianism, and have power together. And I think being in community together and being able to support each other and being able to feel strong together is really our biggest power right now. So that's the organizing that we're doing. The website's weareworthfightingfor.org, which is the coalition site. And we're going to continue to organize there, including having another call on December 19th to bring everyone back together and talk about next steps moving forward. And we know there's marches being planned on January 18th around the country and in DC. And we want to make sure that we're building community and building power together. And that's really, really how we can respond to this moment most effectively.
Yeah, and I love how you both brought the idea of bridging, the gaps, right? Or the ideological or, the gaps that, we think that separate us. And it's interesting because, just kind of going back to some of the issues highlighted in the film, it's interesting that Richard Haass stresses the rising political polarization, the erosion of trust in the institutions, the spread of misinformation. These are some of the key factors that contributing to, our distrust in America politics or democracy, the idea of democracy. But one of the things that we discussed earlier in the season during the film Undivide Us was that there are many times that we perceive the other's view as being more extreme than they actually are. And, when we have the opportunity to engage with one another and to really have respectful disagreements, we know how to do that. We know we are able to have hard conversations in a respectful, manner. So are we more similar than we think? And I wanted to kind of, delve into this idea of, are we being made to believe that we are on the opposite sides of the spectrum, right? Especially when we consider the types of political strategies that they're doing in the campaigns, the fact that the media coverage is biased and, polarization is good business. It's the hateful rhetoric, is proven to drive engagements. And so how much of this divisiveness is just, our inability to compromise on what we believe is our core values, or how much is the result of these political strategies, right? So is there room to, to conciliate these diverse perspectives, and how can we foster that kind of environment?
I might just start by saying that we know, and there were some really, I think, some really reaffirming data in terms of where the American people are on issues, that there actually is not as much that divides us as what media or even what political movements would seek to do. What we know about anti-democratic movements and far-right movements is that they often seek to sow sort of polarization in ways that are actually quite symptomatic of an underlying problem as opposed to the cause of an underlying problem. And we see that play out throughout communities across the country, and then of course in some ways at this more federal level. So I think that if you look at the fact that in this election cycle, you have a president-elect that had to distance himself in the election cycle and disavow some of these most extreme proposals, including those of some of his very closest associates, who he's now appointing or seeking to, at least announcing an intention to appoint to various positions in his cabinet. that shows you where the American people are on so many issues. And it was just a few years ago that if you would have said that states like Missouri would vote to protect things like reproductive rights, people wouldn't have necessarily believed that, even though, by the way, the data has showed that for many years, that there was the vast majority of Americans support a notion of reproductive freedom with respect to the rights that are available to people. People may have very diverse views on their own personal choices or their own personal circumstances, but by and large, by large margins, the American people do not believe that the government should be sort of inserting itself in those sort of most intimate decisions. And you see that across a range of issues. And so I would say, just to answer your question, and when I reflected on some of the film that we were able to look at with the Citizen's Guide to Preserving Democracy, I think that there is more that unites us on issues and values than what is often left to be seen, and that there's a real work to do in mobilizing people and working in communities and in the work that we all do to make sure that we are not allowing sort of polarized and polarization to distract from the very nature of what so many people want, which is just a future for their kids that's better than what they had for themselves, a future for themselves and a present and future for themselves that's better than what folks had before them, a sort of a government that works for all people and not just for some. I mean, those are very basic values, and we see that widely held. And so I think that's how I would sort of reflect on that question. I think when you look at the election and in the United States just recently, and where we saw states on ballot initiatives, climate initiatives in places like Louisiana passing the ballot, abortion initiatives in places like Missouri and Arizona passing the ballot and getting the majority of votes in Florida, public education winning over attempts to privatize it. I mean, you see this across the board in very geographically diverse regions. And so part of our work is to sort of highlight, I think, those commonalities and then build power around those to really achieve the future that we want to make sure that people and communities have in this country.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and also adding things like minimum wage that passed on the ballot, like in Alaska. And I think really foundational is economic justice. That mentioned earlier that my job started focused on overturning Citizens United and looking at the influence of big money in politics. And I think, and it started at the time where Occupy Wall Street was taking place, where people were saying we are the 99%, that people felt like their voice wasn't being heard in politics, and that their voice, and studies were showing that they're not, and also that that people felt an extraordinary economic injustice and inequality, and a growing inequality. And I think that Trump was able to capitalize off that feeling that people have of being disenfranchised across racial lines. And that so what we need to do is lay out, among the other things, among talking about other freedoms like reproductive freedom, we need to talk about economic justice and to demand access to healthcare. Clearly, people are really angry about healthcare and how it exists in the United States, where big corporations control and deny people healthcare. And I think, and those are the items that really unite us. I also think it's really important that we stop othering people and saying they're not educated or they don't understand what they're doing. I think people understand it in their hearts that they're not feeling represented. And we have to make sure that we're providing a path forward where they feel represented, moving forward an agenda. And at the same time, we have to block the agenda of the Trump administration that's going to be an agenda for billionaires. That's who his cabinet is being made up of. It's billionaires and people who want to take out his vengeance on people. But that's who's making up his cabinet. And people are going to see pretty quickly that the agenda of billionaires is not their agenda and doesn't make their lives better. So we have to work to block that agenda, to break the MAGA movement, and then to build alliances with people across party lines, to listen to people and figure out what our commonalities is, which I really think is economic justice at the root. And we need to build to win. That's how that's what we need to be doing over the next 4 years. And over the next 2 years, elections are in 2 years and in 1 year.
Right. I think stop to thinking 2 to 4 year cycles, right? How can we really think of a much further future? But I want to go back to this topic of, the role of media and media literacy, because that's also one of the 10 obligations that he kind of highlights in his guide, is to be informed, to share information responsibly. And so I wanted to ask your opinion on this because, we see misinformation going out so fast. The speed and the amount of misinformation is sometimes harder or faster than we can actually, try to contain. And by the time we are able to figure out what's true from, what's not true, maybe the damage is already done. And so, adding complexity to this is the fact that a lot of times people or institutions, and you say even media networks, they're putting out misinformation, they're spreading this misinformation. They don't really suffer many consequences. So I wanted to delve into the idea of what does that mean for us to be able to identify, what the bias is, what's misinformation, right? Are there specific habits or skills that we can learn to be able to identify it? And how can we make sure that democracy is functioning effectively, perhaps with stricter regulation? And how can we be more severe, speaking both on the organizing side and the litigation side? If there's ways for us, we can be more strict in terms of regulating misinformation and who spreads misinformation.
I mean, I'll just start by saying, and I'm sure Jonah will have more to say on this. I mean, I think this is one of the major fights of our time. This is what advancing democracy looks like in our time, is understanding how we can confront the layers of misinformation and the intentional handiwork of certain far-right political movements to mislead people, and to really try to take advantage of a media landscape that in some ways incentivizes and sensationalizes misinformation in some ways. There's a number of strategies. There have been cases even up at the Supreme Court this last term around misinformation and disinformation of information regarding vaccines and public health measures, where there are opportunities for people and communities to weigh in those cases. And we represented medical experts in those. So I think there's a range of tools that can be used in this time. But part of it, and I really appreciated this in the film highlighting it, part of it is on individuals to really make a personal commitment to truly be vigilant about the information that we are receiving, about the sources of the information that we are receiving. We all need to the extent that we can, do so financially, support journalism that is factual and that is really seeking to uncover the truth, however inconvenient that might be. But at the same time, also really understanding that there is a piece of this where we need to encourage people to be vigilant. And then there's an education component where there are a range of strategies and tactics that individuals and communities can, I think, harness in this time to make sure that we're evaluating our media sources in those ways. I know Jonah will have more, but I think this is really a heart of what the fight for democracy looks like in 2024 and moving into 2025, is sort of understanding how we can confront and, truly confront this culture and intentional effort to mislead people through misinformation.
Yeah, well, I guess one thing is to celebrate victories, is that today the ruling against Murdoch, who's trying to give the Fox empire to his single son instead of his whole family, to keep it an extreme kind of disinformation machine that it's been. And I think Fox News was really, and Murdoch really was at the root of a lot of this misinformation in the media, a lot of false framing of things, and the way that people have been led down this path. So it's great to have that victory today. in court. But I think what Sky's talking about in building people's education and understanding of how to analyze the news is really important. My girls in school are fortunately getting that education today, and I think that that's really important, that it's part of our education system, that people are understanding it. I do think there's really important spaces to regulate it. Like, we're working to pass bills to prevent deep fakes in elections on the state level around the country, and have been really successful in helping to do that in 20 states so far, and are working to do it in the rest of the states right now. And it's nice to be working on something that's so cross-partisan, because people see across the spectrum that this is a problem. But I think also working to educate people and feel empowered over their lives, to build community over the things that matter to them, and to organize around those things helps people feel like they can control their direction, that they can understand the media, that they can analyze the media and work to make the change. I think so we have to be working to empower people to be part of that process.
Yeah, and that makes me go back to the film as well, and how much they emphasize the importance of civics education, right? And how can we, whether it's making mandatory or how we can somehow engage the population in civics education, and the importance of critical thinking, and but the question is that education systems are, how can we better equip the educative systems to provide the skills needed for this kind of critical thinking, right? Because, I think a lot of the idea of advocacy work is very demanding, and it's very exhausting physically and emotionally. You guys have been doing this, and how much it takes of effort. And so how we can, when we think about access to education and access to some of these tools, we're often talking about disenfranchised people who are with very limited access to these kinds of tools, either time or resources, to be able to take advantage of this. So I wanted to ask you, how can we reconcile these advantages and ensure that citizens have equal access to these processes, and regardless of race, regardless of geographic location or income? So how can we make sure that we are exercising, our rights in the face of growing political violence and hatred politics, targeting groups, activists, and organizations like yourselves? So kind of want to make sure that how we are able to engage citizens, especially the ones that feel the most vulnerable.
I mean, I think I'll just highlight that there is, there's a range of efforts right now to undermine public education in this country, to undermine equal access to education, whether those are, proposals at the federal level, like what we see in Project 2025, or whether they're bills that we are anticipating will move through legislatures or have already been passed by legislatures across the country. And so I do think that, a continued focus on public education, on the importance of accessibility in education, on civic engagement, and a focus on, ensuring that civic education is as accessible as possible, and that far-right networks and groups that are seeking to undermine that type of education, seeking to politicize things like civics education, to the kinds of books that you check out in the library, all of this is part of this work at this time to build the foundation that we need in order to empower people in communities to use their voices in power to advance this bold and vibrant democracy for all people. So we're on the front lines of a lot of that at Democracy Forward with the work and the clients that we have the privilege of representing in communities and states across the country. And of course, looking down, at 2025 to where I think we will need to use a lot of the legal tools at the federal level as well. But I think that it's so important, and I had appreciated how the Citizens Guide film really did highlight this is one of the principles and civic education, the importance of that education, the importance of a common language and a common value set that we want to ensure is instilled and that all of us are working towards and for in our own lives.
I mean, I think education is a tool of resistance, right? Like that we can organize and educate people through organizing against the attacks that we're facing, We Are Worth Fighting For trainings are that they're going through a process. So the first gathering was a first step. We're calling on people to do a second step now, and that will be coming out of the December 19th big call to organize, to build and block against the Trump administration. So I think one thing is that we are responsible for educating the public about civics, about democracy, understanding what that means, understanding the threat of someone like Patel and the nomination of someone who says he wants to weaponize the FBI against Trump's enemies, and really the danger of that and how antithetical it is to the foundations of our country and our Constitution. But then also we need to fight to win in blue states right now too, where we can, where there are attacks on education and on our federal education system. We need to push back by winning in those states, by pushing Democrats to pass more funding for our schools, to see this as an opportunity to push back and win things that we need to win access to healthcare. But the education, I think, is really the foundation, and looking at how we use the process of educating people to build a movement, to build resistance, and ultimately to win the power that we need to make the changes that we need, not just to elect Democrats, which I think is important to do. I'll say to defeat the Trump and the MAGA agenda, but I think to build a movement that really is winning economic justice and making people feel like the government is working for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And also one of the most significant, outcomes of this election is the president's ability to shift further the court's composition, right? And the fact that it can really influence political decisions or judicial decisions, for the next few generations. We're talking about healthcare, we're talking about climate change, the economy, all have very significant implications for both domestic and foreign policies. And so I wanted to discuss this with you guys before we start opening questions from the audience. That what do you see the role of youth movements? And John, I've been working with the education for a long time. To participate in this future that they're going to be part of. What do you see the role of youth organizations in the, shaping of public policy, and how can we make sure that we are, when we talk about the dominance of extremism in all levels of power, and that be the Congress, the executive power, now the judicial system, how can we fight that level of systemic dominance? And what is the role of the next generation in identifying those issues and, fighting back, and make sure that they have agencies in these policies that will affect them, in a near future?
I think there are a lot of great examples of youth movements that are active. But I think the climate movement and the sunrise movement, the climate movement is really tremendous example of youth organizing. Within a week of the election, there were 100 sit-ins that took place on campuses to protest for climate. There's a mobilization on February 1st in Washington, D.C. That climate movement's organizing. And I think it's really the youth movement and around climate is really hopeful. Also, the movement for Black Lives really was led by youth and built by youth. So there are many examples of young people taking power and building power. And I think we have that opportunity to do that. And I think, and while we're both blocking the actions of the Trump administration, we also have a chance to be building something that we envision and taking direction from young people, organizing with young people. That's always been the way that we organize within our campaign, is hiring a lot of interns and young people as organizers who come back to work with us after their internships, because they are excited and empowered, and also we really enjoy training them and working with them to build their power. We work with students around the country on campuses to get out the vote, educate people about Project 2025. And I think that's the kind of thing that really we all as organizers and as organizations need to be investing in and to be learning from.
I think the only thing I would add is just with respect to the judiciary, it is important to understand the movements that have shaped the judiciary, the intentional work of the far right movement to sort of shape the federal judiciary and the Supreme Court. It's also important to understand that President Biden has had, really nothing short of a historic record on judicial nominees. He will have appointed more than 220 pro-democracy judges. I believe the last time I looked at the numbers, the majority of those judges are women. Many are professionally diverse. Many are people of color, and that our judiciary is much more reflective of the American people, both in terms of the types of issues that these individuals have prioritized throughout the course of their careers, as well as their demographic characteristics, and obviously their commitment to democracy, than we were seeing in the early days of the Biden administration with the federal judiciary that was inherited after the prior Trump administration. And so I mentioned that to just make sure that we are grounding ourselves. And there's certainly a sobering reality around how these movements have shaped our courts and have sort of shaped the law and reversals and rights. But there's also a motivating reality and a real historic situation now where we do and have seen some real progress in so much of the federal judiciary and so many of the seats that are held across the country. And that's going to be very, very important as we look to turn to those institutions, the courts, which are institutions that if they exist in a democracy, their role really is to protect the rights of people and to protect our democratic institutions. And we are going to have that in the days ahead. So I'm not minimizing, the structural change we need to see, the, concern that we all have for the way these institutions have been shaped, but also want to highlight what has been real progress that many did not think that they would see in the judiciary over the past 4 years.
Yes, so let's get some questions from our audience. What reforms, if any, are necessary to modernize democratic institutions in the face of new challenges? I think we're talking a little bit about this now, and I don't know if you want to go further in this.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just start and then Jen will have others. But I think the main thing is to understand that we really are here to achieve true democracy and true representation for all people. And there are a number of structures in American government that are not aimed at enhancing equal representation of all people. And so whether that is, the Electoral College, whether it is structural representations that are, prioritizing some people's votes over others, there's a realm of, activity around voter suppression that was enabled by the Supreme Court decision in Shelby versus Holder, and sort of a range of ways that the Voting Rights Act has been interpreted and the Constitution has been interpreted. I think those are certainly things that we need to see fixes to. And then we have our courts, which are a very important backstop in stopping extremism and stopping the abridgment of individual rights, but with but that also have anti-democratic tendencies, particularly as they've been continually influenced, especially at the Supreme Court, by far-right movements. And so there are a range of reforms. You saw President Biden call on Congress and the American people to champion reforms to ensure that no person is above the law, and to ensure that our courts work for everyone. And so I think these are the kinds of conversations and the kinds of real work that we have to do to achieve true democracy in this country, including while defending a lot of hard-earned gains that we know will be up now for challenge and quite compromise as we look to this incoming administration.
Yeah, I agree with those things, and I would, go back to the Citizens United ruling and the influence of money in politics too, as just a foundational thing that needs to be addressed in the United States, and instead of getting better, has gotten worse because of the ruling. But I think also at the root is civic education and people feeling empowered to be part of the process, and that there's both an inequality in access because of money in politics, but also because of people's education and their feeling of whether the government should be working for them or they should have access. So that not as much of an institutional change, but it is an institutional change, in that we have to be investing in civic education so that people feel part of the process as part of a transformation. I guess I would also just add public financing of elections, small donor matching funds, like we have now in New York, which really has been a great process here, and just seeing how our legislators run for office here in Syracuse, New York, versus what they had to do before to raise their money. By raising money from big donors in New York City, now they can have small donor events here in Syracuse and raise their money that way. So there are ways that we can do that even now under the Trump administration. Another example is the disenfranchisement of millions of voters who are formerly incarcerated or incarcerated people. And under the first Trump administration, we were able to pass Second Chances Florida to restore the vote to millions of people in Florida who were formerly incarcerated. And obviously there's a lot more to go there in Florida, and nationally, to restore the vote to people who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated.
Just want to chime in with one question here. Do you think that those changes are going to be possible on a federal level, considering, now that most of Congress is leaning towards Trump or aligned with his agenda? Do you guys believe that the best way forward would be with local government, state and citywide?
I mean, I think that's what we have to do right now, but we have to be building to pass federal reform. And that's something that Public Citizen has been at the heart of, is pushing for the Freedom to Vote Act, or HR 1, and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and DC Statehood, and the Native American Voting Rights Act. There are transformative things to address gerrymandering, to address money in politics, to address voting rights and the tax on voting rights as a result of the Shelby ruling, that we need to be building to pass on a federal level. And I think using this time to envision what that looks like. And in the meantime, working to pass on the state level. For example, Michigan really just has a few more weeks to pass the Voting Rights Act there before Democrats are no longer in the majority. And that's an important priority as we speak, that they have to get that done, the Michigan legislature.
Great. Let me go for another question. What are some historical examples of democracies facing crisis, and how were they resolved, or have they been resolved?
Well, right, we're talking to you from Brazil, right? So we're so clearly there are places that have faced recent crisis and overcome them. And obviously, Brazil is not a perfect democracy, but was able to really overcome a crisis and put in a pro-democracy leader in the face of someone who was trying to be an authoritarian leader there, and did the same action as Trump's January 6th, and now was prosecuted for it as Trump should have been in the United States. So I think there are, I can pass it off for for other ideas, but I think that's one immediate in the just immediate short term.
I would just say that we can also look at our own history, that the United States, of course, was founded with some of these democratic ideals, at least in principle, but that fell short of the achievement of those ideas and our dehumanization and enslavement of people and the lack of, equal representation for all people. You can go back that far, but you can also look at the beginning of the 20th century where there was a deep wealth disparity in the United States. There was a deep power differential. There was massive white supremacy, as well as a time where communities and people were structurally marginalized, and a Supreme Court that every time the democratic process, whether at the state or federal level, would seek to advance and solve these problems, whether that was putting forward pro-worker laws, such as limiting the amount of hours that one could be required to work without just compensation, or seeking to bust up monopolies and sort of large trade cartels. You had a Supreme Court that was at the time striking all of that down. Does that sound familiar in some way? And it was really through that adversity that people rose up, that the progressive movement in the country, through organizing and building collective power, we saw people in communities be able to wield that power even in very difficult forms of adversity. We saw the Supreme Court over time, in order to solve a legitimacy crisis and low public opinion, really be an institution that could be the cradle of some of the civil rights advancements that we saw decades later. And of course, there's been a backlash against that progress, which is where we find ourselves in so many ways now. And so I would just say that even our own history can both give us examples of how the United States has overcome, and people in the United States against all odds have overcome so much, but also about what we must do in this moment, which is truly an inflection point moment. And just because the country has been in certain of these inflections before does not mean that this is any less serious, or that it is any more desirable, because I think we really are at a moment where the American people, where it's going to be important for the American people to make their voices heard, and for us to look at how to build collective power in all of these ways, including through the courts, but also through organizing and through mobilization of institutions and of people and communities.
Yes, thank you. And just to throw a little bit more of a provocation at the end, we obviously know that, all of these issues are not unique to the United States. When you talk about, these are global trends, we see a lot of connection between the extreme right agenda all around the world. And they're often, sponsored or, backed by even the same handful of groups. And so what are some of the issues that you see? I mean, all of the issues that we are dealing with here when you talk about, extreme right and the end of human rights and all of that, it's very universal. But what are some of the issues that you believe could be the most unifying, and how do you see this greater association with international communities, international organizations in fighting for these universal rights?
I mean, I feel like I have a lot of answers. I guess like healthcare is a clear one, that we've seen, with the outrage that people have expressed in the wakes of the shooting that took place this week in New York. Obviously shooting is never okay. But the idea, the rage that captured of people feeling that these big industries are working to profit off their lack of healthcare, their lack of well-being, is extraordinary. And I think that's something that really resonates across the country, that people feel like they're not being given the healthcare they deserve, that they need. I think access to education will be one too. I think that the fight to maintain to restore our democracy is something that we can talk about internationally and work in solidarity internationally to do and to figure out over the next years. Those are some things, but I think there'll be a lot.
Yeah, I would just say I think the voting and the fight for sort of democracy in all of its forms and equal representation, but then also these economic issues and just the basic promise that we want our kids to have more opportunities than we have, and we want to have more opportunities than those that came before. And I think that basic truth we see as a unifying factor both in the United States but also across the globe.
Wonderful. Well, it's good to end on this note. Thank you both so much, Sky and Jonah, for sharing your expertise and your insights with our audience, and for allowing us to close this, this season with a much needed hopeful note. As much as we know that the way ahead is going to be hard, knowing that we have all the tools we need to fight and to, do what we can are available to us. And thank you all for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
And, just keeping our hopes up, I also wanted to share some important milestones of this eventful year. We had several policy initiatives encompassing a range of issues, like we were said here before, from education to abortion rights, minimum wage to family leave. They all have achieved success in 2024, despite a mixed electoral outcome. And this year's election also brought a significant increase in the diversity of elected officials. Landmark achievements include Delaware's Sarah McBride as the first openly trans person elected to Congress, Senator-elect from Maryland Angela Alsobrooks and Delaware's Lisa Blunt Rochester marked the first time that two Black women will simultaneously serve in the congressional chamber. And Kim from New Jersey is the first Korean American to be elected senator. Monroe Nichols will be Tulsa's, Oklahoma, first ever Black mayor. And Pamela Goodwine became the first Black woman to be elected to Kentucky's Supreme Court. These results suggest that ideological ideas don't always translate into policy priorities for most Americans, and that we might find, after all, the right opportunity to put country first. So as the holiday season approaches and we prepare for the new year, I would like to invite all of us to take some time for personal reflection. Let us consider our individual roles in shaping the future, recognizing that our choices, our actions, and our reactions to these events all have a collective impact. While we will inevitably face many uncertainties ahead, my wish is that we'll be able to prioritize unity based on mutual respect, even amidst differing perspectives and ideals. So with that, we conclude the Museum of Political Corruption's 2024 programming. I want to express my deepest gratitude to MPC's founder and president, Bruce Roeder, and our amazing trustees and advisors for their support. I want to particularly thank my team, Clara Arruda and Bernardo Cunha, for all their hard work and for making this another successful year for our Disrupt Film series. Last but not least, I want to thank you all, our audience, for being part of this journey with us. I hope you have enjoyed our program, and I look forward to seeing you all again next year with more impactful films and powerful conversations. I wish you all a safe, peaceful, and bright new year. Thank you and happy holidays.